shop. Second item on the agenda is discussion and possible action for the construction and financing of the new wastewater treatment plant. Leroy?
There's some spreadsheets that may be relatively small on the screen, so I printed those out.
Thank you.
Exhibits.
Thank you for doing that.
I got multiple ones.
Sure.
Leroy, you can have one back, sir. Thank you.
Here's your phone.
No, he texted me yesterday and asked if there was anything on the agenda. I said, not really. No?
Before I start my presentation, you all seem to like to see the plans. So this is the plan documents for Wastewater Treatment Plant. And we'll have a set of them in the city clerk's office for anybody that doesn't think we have a set of plans. They want to review them. I know some of you are always tempted to modify the plans after we put it out for bid. So here, you want to read them?
Don, would you take care of that for us, please?
Yeah, I'll look them over this evening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some introductions. Of course, we have city engineer Bill Myers, who's the engineer on the project. And I'll do the first run through of the presentation, but when we stop for questions on various points, these individuals may assist with answering the questions. And then we have Alan Brooks, who is bond counsel, and we have John Wolf, who is financial advisor. With that, the first slide is just basically a repeat of our agenda, talking about what we're going to try to cover tonight. The second slide is a schedule. And this is not etched in stone. If we can expedite the schedule, of course, depending on city council's blessing and approval, we would like to get to this point of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board loan approval even in October if we could. One, to lock in the attractive interest rate, and number two, OWRB sometimes doesn't have some of their meetings in the late fall. So we don't want to depend on going to a meeting in December to get it approved and they decide not to meet in December. So we will try to move this schedule up as we can. Of course, tonight is a work session. And then August 1st, we should receive comments from environmental agencies. Then August 4th, our council meeting or Public Works Authority meeting will have a resolution to authorize the loan application to OWRB, and to authorize professional services agreement with our bond counsel and financial advisor and our local counsel for this particular project. We plan to submit plans to DEQ to start the process to get our construction permit in August 10th. In September 1st, we should receive all of the environmental information documents back. And then we target September 16th to receive our construction permit. October 1, we expect to have the finding of no significant impact, and that completes the environmental review process. We have to wait 30 days, if I remember correctly, from there before we can go to OWRB to get the loan approved. So if we can get that done before October 1, we might be able to make the October third Tuesday, I believe, in October, board meeting of WRB. October 6th, authorized going out for bids by the Public Works Authority, advertised on October 14th, bid letting on November 5th, November 17th, if we don't make the October meeting, to go to OWRB bond meeting for approval of our loan. And then on December 1st, final approval to borrow the funds and award the construction contract. We will do the borrowing in two segments. The first $8 million we will close in December of 2020, and then we will do the second $8 million loan in January 4th. And we have to do that because of the way our trust indenture for the Public Works Authority is structured. Plan to start construction in February of 2021. It's an 18 to 24 month project. So you're looking at July of 2022 or roughly January 2023. Our existing facility, we got our discharge permit approved, and so it now expires on May 31st, 2025. So we have adequate time to do this project without worrying about renewal of our existing permit. But 2025 will be here before we know it. Just some comparisons, and we'll get into more details as we go through this. The type of process at the existing 1955 wastewater treatment plant is a trickling filter treatment. The new facility will be a sequencing batch reactor, SBR type treatment, and that is the type of plants that people are building today. And we'll go through some of the problems with the trickling filter process that was installed back in the 50s. Average flow between 900,000 to 1 million gallons per day. Of course, that won't change with the new plant. The influent design flow for the existing plant's 1 million. It'll be 1.5 million for the new facility. Peak flow for our existing plant is 1.35 million gallons a day. The new plant will be 3 million. Peak storm flow, existing plant is 4 million, and the new one will be 7 million, and it is designed for roughly a little over 14,000 population. And remember, not everybody in town is on our sewer system. So that would even be a bigger town than that when you consider that. Going through this, I know this slide's a little small. Doesn't like me using the mouse apparently. This is the existing plant, and it sets on the Cimarron River. But it is past where the Cottonwood Creek comes in. I don't know why it's doing that to me. This is actually the floodway, not the floodplain. So when it was built in 55, there was not a floodplain study, or it would not have been constructed there. They wouldn't allow you to construct it in the floodway itself. So that's what this green area is. So we need to move it outside of the floodway, and North Academy Road, 21st Street, Cooksey Road, to give you some idea. This is the location of the new wastewater treatment plant. It is a sale of the old landfill out by the transfer station that was never used. It's outside the floodplain. The collection point, this is the main trunk that all of the wastewater coming from the entire town is collected to this point. And at that point is where we will connect into that line to take it over to the new SERV plant. And then we will go over the reasoning of why in more detail. But instead of discharging into Cimarron River right here, it's more cost effective for us to bring the treated wastewater back and bring it over here to the current discharge point, because the limitations on discharge is different here than here, because you have this additional water coming into the river, and we'll go over that in more detail. I think that kind of lays out the project. Of course, the 1955 wastewater treatment plant has had a couple upgrades in 1982 and 2001. There's a lot of reasons why it needs to be replaced. I'm just going to highlight it's reached the end of its intended design life. City manager was born in 1955 as well, and he's pretty much reached the end of his professional design life. It sits on the Cottonwood Creek floodway, and the trickling filter treatment process cannot meet the more stringent discharge limits that we're faced with today or satisfy the projected flows that we have going into the plant. So it's reached the end of its life and it needs to be replaced. There's numerous other things. The grit chamber equipment's antiquated, requires continuous maintenance. Several other issues as well with the existing plant, but just want to highlight the primary ones. The new plant, this is the layout for the new facility. Would point out these chambers here are for expansion, so that you don't have to build another facility to expand. So we're planning for future growth in the future. The design parameters for the new wastewater treatment plant, and I'm not an expert on the plant, so I'm not going to try to explain these, but again, the influent designed for 1.5 million gallons. The peak storm flow 7 million. We have infiltration inflow in our system, so when we have a storm event, we get more flow. It's designed again for a population of 14,000.
Is that our projected population for 2050? Is that the?
It wasn't one time. We haven't updated, of course, our comp plan. The design is a sequencing activated sludge batch reactor SPR plant. Multiple treatment processes are combined into a single vessel that can be adjusted for variable inflows, opposed to a conventional treatment plant, which requires individual vessels and treatment units for each process. So it's the latest and best. If future basin designed into the footprint, I showed you the future expansion area of the plant, are constructed at a later date, the total design flow would then go up to 3 million gallons a day and serve a population of 28,000 if we need to expand, without building a new facility, but just adding the additional vessels and equipment to the facility. We're going to use UV disinfection. I remember in Coffeyville in 2010 when we built the new wastewater treatment plant, UV disinfection was relatively expensive. but it was a lot easier to manage than other alternatives. But since 2010, they have improved that process, and the utility cost for doing UV is much more attractive. Our discharge to our existing discharge point on Cimarron River, where we discharge now. Discharge comparison, the additional cost to go back to our existing discharge point at the existing plant is roughly $600,000. Our cost to discharge adjacent to the new plant would be $625,000. We'd be required to do additional testing. And so cost-wise, it's about the same to discharge either location, but there's advantages on the limits that we would face, the amount of testing we'd have to do to just take it back to our current discharge point. Again, that's the highlight of that, and I thought we would pause at this point, maybe to answer questions on the facility itself before we moved on to the budget or cost estimate and then the financing plan.
Are there any issues with the diameter of the pipes going in that that is a concern when we have a storm surge, if you will?
We do not anticipate that will be an issue because we designed knowing that we have an infiltration and inflow problem. And so that should not create a problem for us, correct, Bill?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I will go on and talk about cost. This plant will cost more in utilities to run, and we anticipate that we may be required to have up to 2 new employees. We're going to start with 1 new employee. But the additional cost for primarily utilities and chemicals is about $353,000 a year to operate this plant. Now that's overstated to some degree because that's the actual estimated cost to operate this plant. So electric and chemicals, we didn't go back and subtract out what we're paying now. So that's overstated to some degree. And that spreadsheet is the first of the spreadsheets that I handed out to you. You want to look at it in more detail. This next sheet is a summary of the budget. And the second sheet I handed you, there's about 3 pages. That is a detailed cost estimate. What's on the screen is a summary. And the cost of construction is $14.4 million, and then you have contingencies of $1.4 million. I'm rounding these off. Cost of issuing the loan or bond, $276,000, and then engineering services. And on engineering services, we subtracted out all the things we've already paid from the number, but we wanted you to see the whole number. And then we backed out what we've already paid. So the project is going to cost $16,854,000. And I think I've given an example before. In the 2010 timeframe in Coffeyville, we built a new wastewater treatment plant at that time, and similar sized cities, and it was $10 million. Construction costs, so that's 10 years ago. And then, of course, you have approved, and it's on the agenda tonight, to document receipt of the construction permit. We are doing a dewatering box and a sludge box to get rid of some of the sludge at our existing wastewater treatment plant. And that is a little over 300,000. And so we have to figure that into our total cost. The dewatering box, when we build a new plant, will just be moved to the new plant. So we're not buying something that we won't use in the future. And the more sludge we remove now, the less it's going to cost us to decommission or get rid of the old plant. And those are things that we need to do. And you have already approved that 335,000 expense. So if you look at it, total construction budget, 16.8 million. The sludge box and dewatering the existing plant, 335. Total 17,200,000 if you round it off. Funding source would be the loan from Oklahoma Water Resources Board, 16 million. If you remember, a couple years ago, we created a wastewater treatment fund to start going ahead and putting money in there from the Cip Tax and other funds that we could transfer in there from operations. So what we can't borrow because our limited authority under our covenants or provisions under our trust indenture, we will pay for out of that fund, 1,189,000. At the end of this budget year in October, we estimate Fund 65 will have a balance of 1.2 million. And of course, that will grow some more before we actually go to construction. The additional O&M, 353,000. The source of funding that will be Fund 20, our actual Public Works Authority operating budget. We budgeted in our next year's budget, the draft that we've done, $500,000, plus we went ahead and budgeted one of the two positions to show that we will have that amount of money that we can budget in future budgets to pay for that. While we're under construction and don't have that expense, that money will be used as part of the financing money, and I will show you that when we get to the financing. With that, again, pause to see if there's any questions on cost and funding sources before we go into the amortization schedule and the loan.
So when we looked at this a couple of years ago, and maybe this is more of a question for Bill, and actually looked at it before you even got here in detail, it was 14 million. How did it grow by almost 3 million? Because I don't see the old numbers here. I know time naturally is going to increase cost.
That is true. I don't remember the exact.
I don't know the
numbers.
exact. It was in the 14 range,
Yeah.
but now it's basically 17.
Yeah.
I
don't
want to point
remember.
out one thing, which may be part of the problem. When I came here, city staff typically, when they give a report to city council, would give the construction budget. They didn't add in all of the contingency and the engineering, the issuing cost. So that may be part of the problem. When I came here, I changed that, and now when we report to the city council on a project, even if we've already awarded engineering, we always give a complete cost that includes everything. So that 14 million may have just been the construction cost, and if you go back and look,
I saw that on there.
construction is 14.4. So that may be part of the problem is.
Well, the 700 for engineering was always in it.
Yeah.
I remember that pretty explicitly. So I don't know where, it's $3 million discrepancies, you know, for a couple anyway.
The cost is going to be what it is, and of course, we'll bid it out, but It is a 18-year term, and this spreadsheet is the last spreadsheet that's on 11 by 17 that's folded out. Interest rates a little over 1.5%. Interest that we will pay over that 18-year term is over $3 million. And that is the amortization side of it. Now, this is the payment side, and you can see there's several sources. This has been backloaded so that we pay more principal on the backside than pay it equally over the loan. And the reason for that is some of the funding sources are revenue streams that we're using for other projects until they're paid off. The CIP tax, what we did was we took, city council at one of the retreats decided that 4 million of the CIP money, roughly $17 million over 15 years, 4 million of it would be towards the wastewater treatment plant. You take what we've already paid in engineering, what we set aside in Fund 65 to fund that, then these are the equal amounts to get to that 4 million left that we promised to take out or dedicated out of the CIP. Of course, CIP ends in 30. And this amount will come out of the utility operating fund, and where I said that we had budgeted $500,000 in next year's budget, FY21 budget. Well, we won't have those additional operating costs next year, so that will make up that $400,000. This is the only portion of the financing plan when we actually get into operations after 18 to 24 months. This may be a little tight, but I think it's very doable. To give you some idea, we're in a lot better financial position than we were 3 years ago, 4 years ago. We now have roughly 1.7 million sitting in the wastewater utility that's unfunded balance. Our stabilization fund for just the Guthrie Public Works Authority is now fully funded at $1 million. So we do have some resources. And then remember, it was $350 for additional operation, and $50,000 of this would go into payment debt service. The digester loan retires in 2025, if I'm reading that correctly from over here. Once it is paid off, then the money we're using for that debt service would go towards paying this loan. Same with our, let's see, this one is the Langston line. And when it pays off, that debt service will go towards the wastewater treatment plant debt service. When our water plant gets paid off in, what date is that?
2031,
2030.
2030.
That, of course, will provide substantial revenue towards this debt service. And then we have a loan under CMOM where the city was under a consent decree from DQ and borrowed a lot of the CMOM money up front to do a substantial amount of lines to satisfy DQ and get out from under that consent decree. That debt service would go to this, and I was in error at our last meeting. I'd forgotten the revenue stream from the CMOP. We will still have roughly $175,000 that's not part of that to do annual wastewater collection line repairs and replacement. just like we're doing now. So that won't go away. As you look at these and compare on your sheet to the debt service, there are years that the amount of funds available for debt service exceed the payment. Just like here, that's a positive number, and this is cumulative. Then there are some years where the debt service exceeds what we have set aside for payment that year. Well, that will come from what we built up in prior years. And you see at the end, we will have roughly $40,000 left when we make the last payment out of that reserve fund we built up over time to kind of level the payments out. I will tell you this financing plan leaves very limited revenue to fund any additional projects of any size. So in between now and 2038, if there's another major project, we'll probably be faced with a situation where you're going to have to talk either some additional fee or even a utility rate increase. And don't want to go in this financing without at least not being aware. You're committing a lot of your revenue stream to this project, but it's a $17 million project. This appears to be the best financing plan for the project. We're getting a very attractive interest rate. If we wait, of course, you can bump into the 2025 renewal of our existing discharge permit for the existing plant, and of course, inflation, the cost could go up even more. With that, we would stop for questions.
Questions from the council? Wow.
So does this appear to be a plan that we can move forward with? Not asking for a formal vote tonight, but just some guidance that, so that we know to continue down this path and put the project together.
Well, there comes a point in time where when a citizen goes to flush, it's not gonna happen if we don't. I mean, that's where we've been.
Probably
for a while.
flush, but where it's going to end up, we may not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've been here for several years.
Well, we've already had it.
The plant is built in 55, so it's 65 years old.
Yeah.
It's outlived its life. The type of treatment process is no longer a treatment process. I know in Coffeyville, we had a very similar treatment process, and we could meet discharge limits in the summertime, but in the wintertime, we couldn't because the biological life would go dormant in the wintertime. And for years, EPA would let you get by with that, but then they decided, no, you got to meet those discharge limits all 12 months. We had to build a new plant. So it's an antiquated type treatment process as well as having our plant. So everything is working against continuation of this plant. It's in the floodway, so we can't go back to the same location. So that's why we have to find a new location that sets up high enough that it's out of the floodplain.
I like the fact that it's going to be out of the floodplain, like you were saying, and you can expand out to 28 or to 30,000 people, so that makes a huge difference.
Well, and plus the funding source is a lot better today, I think, than it was 2 years ago, isn't it? Or is it?
Yeah, oh yeah.
You know, I think that might be about the only question in my mind is, you know, when we started talking about this a few years ago, we talked about delaying as much as we could, we thought, so that as some of these other obligations were paid off, then that money could go towards this major project, which you're showing here on your spreadsheet. I guess the only question would be, you know, what would happen if we bite off another year or two? Of course, then we getting very close to DEQ coming in and mandating some things for us. Plus, could we expect that the interest rate, I can't imagine that the interest rate is going to get much better on a loan than what it is right now.
And then you're potentially faced with inflation cost for construction,
Yeah.
if you wait. The reason that we didn't move forward a couple of years ago is at one point, we were transferring substantial dollars out of the Public Works Authority to the general fund. And with some growth in our revenue the last couple of years, we have weaned ourselves from those transfers, and the general fund is standing more on its own. And so that gives us more cash flow in the Public Works Authority. 3 years ago, I couldn't guarantee you that we could have made the payments for the first 3 or 4 years until some of these other debt services retire. Now we're in a position to do that where we weren't back in 2017.
I guess the other question that I would have is, I think it's really good planning to build in some extra capacity that we can expand into. Whether that is 100%, we're expanding to potentially 100% more capacity, if I'm understanding this correctly, in terms of population that we can serve, the numbers that you were giving us.
From 15 to 25
yeah.
population, 25,000.
And I don't know what the additional cost is to build in that reserve, if you will. Bill, do you know what the cost is for that extra capacity?
So where you double the flow you're talking about,
Yeah,
Steve?
right.
But you're not actually putting the equipment in. All
No,
you're doing is putting
you're just-
basins
Yeah.
So Mayor, if you're asking if we could go ahead and put the equipment in now, is that what you're asking?
No, I'm actually asking, how did we arrive at basically almost doubling the capacity of population served? What if we only went up 25% instead of 100%? Where did you arrive at that's a good number?
Yeah. Well, we looked at what made sense, is what we looked at the geometry of the proposed plant. We said, okay, if we had one vessel, we get a certain increase, say we get a 25, we get 30%. 3 vessels, we can basically double the capacity of the plant. That's what we looked at. Then we added another, the 4th vessel could either be used for a digester, or it could be used as another fluidization basin. So that's basically just a geometry thing. So by the time we need that much capacity, technology might have even advanced even beyond where it is today.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's just a good number. And I might add too, and Leroy sort of talked about a little bit, when we look at our population, we know we're over 10 today. We believe we are. Well, not all of the population is on sewer. So probably we have 3,500 nominal customers, so that's probably 8,500 people we think are on sewer in that range. So really look at it like that, based on population-wise, if we're at 28,000, it's, really we're 3 times what we are now. So those vessels are of the same geometry of what we're proposing, so it would make sense to leave that area open for future vessels.
But it's more cost-effective to leave areas where you can expand this facility to serve a growing population than to enclose all this and not have that. And then how are you going to expand it later? I mean, are you going to build a second plant?
Yeah, no, I think that is excellent planning. I'm just concerned, not concerned, I just am questioning the expansion percentage, if you will. 3 times, I mean, now you're saying 3 times as many citizens can be served if all of that space were used.
Well, but you don't necessarily have to fill it all in at once either.
I understand.
I do have one question. What if we were fortunate enough to get a rather large new industry that used a lot of water, had a very high water capacity need? Do we have enough, or even at 28,000? Because it isn't just the citizens that we may be serving, it might be industry, hopefully.
That's a good question. When we did the water plant, we tried to
Anticipate.
anticipate, and I don't remember this off the top of my head, but
Right.
as far as a giant industry coming in, you know, you probably wouldn't want to process their sewer through here. If it was, you know, anything that would use that type of water, they'd have their own process, and then we deal with it in another fashion. But as far as providing water to them, I mean, I think we're using a peak day, a nominal 2 million, I believe now. I haven't checked in a while, so, you know, we do, you know, 4 to 6 million, what we have. So we have a lot of capacity. And then getting an industry like that in produces problems for water supply and other things, but also is, I mean, that's a.
It would be a win-win,
Oh,
maybe.
Yeah, blessing, yeah.
Well,
Well,
they're
I
gonna
would-
do their own, they're gonna have their own, they're gonna expel their own waste is what they're gonna do.
Correct, yes. They would.
Typically.
And the beauty of something like this, going back to Steve's question, is if they would have thought this ahead in 1955, we might only be putting out a few million right now instead of 17 to expand our existing plant. So that's the way I look at that.
Any other questions from council?
No, that one, and I wasn't even sure if it was an intelligent question, so.
Good question. Do you have anything else, Leroy?
That's it.
So the agenda item calls for discussion and possible action. What was the possible action you were asking for?
We always put it on there in case there is something that we need action on,
Okay.
so that we're in position to do that. I think the only thing we actually need tonight is to make sure there's a general concurrence that we're going the right direction, so we keep moving forward. Next meeting, August 4th, we will be bringing the professional service agreement with the bond counsel and financial advisor, and for authorization to approve starting the loan process. So we just want to make sure we're going down the right path, and that's all we really need to know tonight. Concurrence.
So shouldn't we hear some of the financing, or are we gonna wait to do that in the actual GPWA meeting?
Well, I thought I just provided.
Well, I know you did provide that, but again, you know, I guess OWRB is, or the Oklahoma Water Resources, where we're gonna get the loan from. I don't know that everybody knows that here. I know the interest rate's 1.58, right?
I'll let them visit with you.
Okay, John?
I mean, aren't we gonna take out I thought originally we were gonna look at taking out part of, a potential of taking out part of this the water treatment plant because interest rates are so low, no?
Right, then let me, I guess I can talk with
Yep,
our
you
master
can.
here, okay?
You can.
Couple points in regards to what you're addressing. And Leroy addressed as far as timing we talked 2 years ago, there are a lot of negatives with COVID-19 globally. One of the positives for this project is rates have come down, interest rates have come down. Obviously, treasury rates, where a lot of the market's tied to, has drove down interest rates significantly. A year and a half ago, we were looking at potentially an interest rate of 3% for long-term financing, 20, 30 years. That wouldn't have been abnormal at that time. So when you talk about an interest rate almost half that, you saw on the handout that you were looking at approximately $3 million in interest that you'll pay over this period of time. It would certainly, if you looked at doubling that, you're talking $3 million in interest, comparing 1.58 to a little over 3%, which is where we could have been. So that's one thing that's changed significantly. Two is what was very important was to look at where your rate structure was, where it is today, and then look at other debt that was falling off. We're obviously 2 to 3 years closer to those different loans being paid off. And so the intent was to avoid any significant increases in utility rates, to take the rates that you've already passed and are assessing to your customers right now when other debt falls off. Could we cash flow the $16 million with those dollars that would no longer be necessary for the water treatment plant financing, and move those over to fund this project? And the goal all along was to make this work and have as easy as or as a little impact as possible. And that, in working and talking with the city and Leroy's goal was, let's get us financially to a point to where we can get a loan, and then let's see where we're at cost-wise and addressing all our other infrastructure needs, all our other operational needs. Where will we be? And to just pure good fortune from one side of this, like I said with COVID, you were able to be in a period today where the interest, when you talked about, cost estimates back 2 years ago, the interest that you're going to save by a 1.58% for 18 years fixed is very unusual. It is exceptional as far as borrowing money, and so that turned out to where, can we cash flow this and without going back and asking to address increasing rates for this project. Everything that you had and put in front of you tonight, though, was very important, is those are estimates. We're at the estimate stage right now, but there's been multiple iterations of going over this over the last year, and so I think that with the other debt falling off with the water treatment plant, that debt then being, that cash flow that went to that, instead of asking for more revenues, we're taking that money and putting it over on the plant. So you've addressed two major systems, your two most important systems, your revenue generating systems of the city. You were able to address a new plant a few years back, as far as for water and for wastewater. Hopefully, with all the estimates we have now, that we'll know here in the next 90 to 120 days how close we are to this model working, and the cash flows means, close to what we're projecting today. And so I'd be glad to answer any questions. That's all I have. I'm just putting icing on the cake.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good time. So several years ago, you came in and we refinanced the water treatment plant.
Correct.
And I believe we brought it down, I don't remember the exact number, but to like 3-point-some% or whatever the interest rate was.
Right, you were at 4.5 and you brought it down to around 3.
Right, so what prevents us from moving that to the 1.58 at this point? Because there's a significant balance left to that, along with doing this wastewater treatment plant at 1.58, giving extra cash towards the project.
Very good question, in that I don't have the actual transcript in front of me, but the loan that we did when we refinanced the loans with the water treatment plant loan, we actually did that with, I believe, a call date or a prepayment date, and I don't know if Alan, you can remember. I believe we're certainly years away from any prepayment option. Typically, when you go out and you borrow money,
Because we were at a prepay option at that point.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest with you, Brian, I can't remember what we did as far as we did a no prepayment because the rate was so low compared to what you had, or so many years in. But that's certainly something I can get back to Mr. Alsup as to the prepayment on that. But certainly, anytime we get to where we can prepay debt, we're going to be knocking at your door and saying, look, this is where the market, and that would certainly help out tremendously. I just can't remember off the top of my head.
But it might be an option.
Well, if there is a prepayment, it will, understanding for those of you, let's say there's an option to prepay that 3 years from now. That particular institution, and this is Chase, JP Morgan Chase that has the note, they would actually say, all right, you can pay us off, but you're going to have to pay us interest until that prepayment date. Then you can pay off the principal balance, whatever is left that's due. And so that's where it typically doesn't make economic sense to look at that. But that's a very good question, and I'll look at seeing when that was done in 16, so more likely the earliest. And I see Kim looking at our monitor, maybe looking at
Coming up.
your server. It probably would not have been before probably 23 if at all, but we'll look at that.
Good.
All right, that's all I have on it.
All right, anybody else have any other questions? Okay, all right, very good. Well, I think from the standpoint of the questions and the comments so far, Leroy, I think the timing is right. The price is expensive, but it's something that we have to do. Can't kick the can down the road any further, any longer.
Hey, one last question, Leroy.
No,
When
no,
does
you had
this-
your chance. I'm kidding.
When does well, this is important. When does the 1.58, I mean, that is subject to change, obviously, with the market, right?
I just want to take my mask off. So
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Alan, go ahead.
The way the water board program works as it relates to this program is the rate is set typically approximately 10 days before we close the transaction. So. as we
It's an
get-
estimate now.
It's based on market conditions.
That was like middle of last week, towards, Wednesday last week. I did point that out. That is where it's at today, depending where the market's at, 3 months from now. So it would be different.
It's purely an estimate, but it's indicative of where rates are today.
Right.
And so it's part of the reason to move this process along as fast as we can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not from the standpoint where we're trying to predict that rates are going to go up or go down. We just know that they're, in relative terms to historical rates, extraordinarily low. We're very, very close to all-time lows in U.S. interest rates,
Yeah.
which is reflected here. So
Well, that was
bird
time-
in hand.
Timing is right. Timing is right. Okay, anybody else? Questions? All right, Leroy, anything else?
That's it.
Okay, that being the last item on our agenda, ladies and gentlemen,